experience, I relate getting inside the people in China to getting into the Forbidden City. You go through one gate, and you think you're inside, but you're not. Then you go through another gate, and you think you're inside, but you're not. And you go through another gate, and it takes many, many gates before you get inside the people in China.
Could you remember when you heard about China the first time?
Well, I was brought up in the UK, and you know, I went to college in London, and there were basically quite a few Chinese in London, and so. But the real kind of vision of China came when I actually met Jiang Zemin in Dallas, and I gave a talk to him. He had like 4 or 5 people with him. He was Minister of Industry at the time. Yeah. I gave a talk to him in terms of what was going on in the electronics industry. Rockwell is actually doing quite a bit of business with China. And then we went to lunch, and the lunch was basically a series of small round tables. And he invited me to sit at the head table with him, which I was not supposed to. So there was a senator, and but we were sitting across from each other, so we had eye contact. So he was telling me about China and telling me what some of his goals for China were. And I was fascinated. And then I was invited to give a talk in China, but because of my position in Rockwell, So that was something that really stimulated me in terms of really wanting to understand about China. And then, of course, I started reading and decided I want to learn about China.
So in your 30-some years dealings and communication with China, what challenges have you had to overcome in order to understand China?
What I had to overcome from a business point of view was that in the US, you can have initial meeting with the client and you could get a contract. Here, you have initial meeting, and the goal of the initial meeting is to get the next meeting. And then you have the next meeting. And maybe after 5 or 6 meetings or 5 or 6 dinners, then maybe you get the contract.
What biases do you think Americans should really give up before they can really understand China?
Yeah. Well, you know, that was a question you asked, and I thought about that quite a bit. And what you have today in the US is a political agenda, and basically the reevaluation of the RMB is a major part of the political agenda. What that does is that it forces the US problems in effect on China. So the US has big deficits, consuming more than they're producing. And they're saying, well, it's China's fault because China is basically giving us these goods. In effect, the US is buying the goods. Okay. So that's one thing the US has to give up, is that China is not the problem for the US economy. It's the US economy that has to be taken care of.
Because we talk a lot about how Americans understand China, but what do you find the Chinese? How much do you think the Chinese understand Americans?
With a lot of the Chinese people that I have met, including corporate leaders, not very well. Part of the reason, and again, I think in China you have 3 or 4 different categories of corporate leaders. If you look at the SOEs, they tend to be older, and they tend to have gone through, basically the Cultural Revolution and so on, and so they tend to be very China-centric. Now maybe they do acquisitions of mining companies, but they tend to be China-centric. The other extreme are basically the internet companies like the Baidus and the Alibabas, where they really have in the past had joint ventures in the US, and they tend to be very, very knowledgeable in terms of what's going on globally.
You divulged just a little bit, maybe one strategy in personal life?
In personal life, yeah, I think in personal life, I think one that's is very useful is to stab somebody with a borrowed dagger, where you basically get another person or the idea of another person to change the mind of a person. So you say, well, this person is very important and they have this idea, so don't you think it's a good idea? But it's really your idea, and if you propose it as your idea, it might not get accepted. So that's the technique I'm using more and more. So it's basically taken from the borrowing the stolen dagger. But in business, that technique is very useful in terms of winning.
You are providing consultants.
Of course.
Consultancy, right?
Of course. So we're trying to help US companies do business in China, and helping Chinese companies do business in China as well as outside China. And also basically bringing companies together for strategic relationships. In the corporate environment, you have two strategies. One is defensive, which is protect the local market. So you protect the China market. And then the offensive strategy is gaining market share in global markets. So what we see right now, or the main emphasis in China, is to build capabilities to satisfy the local market, so there doesn't have to be imports. That helps the balance of trade. You build an industrial base, you build a middle class, you build more consumption, you build expertise, and then you can export. And it maybe initially you export to other developing countries like, India, South America, Africa, but over time you will then become a world power. So that's what we see happening in China. But it's going to take a number of years. So when you kind of go through these strategies, and then you realize how complex the Chinese thinking process can be. So it takes time, right?
Yeah.
Where I have given up is on the Chinese characters. Some people have shown me, Joe Min has shown me some of the Chinese characters, and that's one that I will never, ever try and learn, because it takes too much brain power.
How do you foresee China in the next?
Well, the next book I'm also working on this is only a rough draft. It says, what does China think and what will China be in the future?
Wow.
So basically so we're trying
So
to...
it's a trilogy, right?
It's not really meant as a trilogy, but part of the thought process here is, China inventing gunpowder, the printing presses, and a lot of these inventions were not well utilized in terms of global positioning. So is China today different? Or will China become, introverted and protect everything? And we think today China is different. We think China really understands what it takes to be a global power. And so I think the younger generation, they will be a lot more outward looking. And I think they will demand a different way of life. So I think there'll be the strains inside China of the older generation wanting to have control and the younger generation wanting to have freedom. I think you have it today in the fact that Chinese are very individualistic. If you look at all the small businesses, all the entrepreneurs. I see China having many challenges. I see many good things being done. I see problems, but direction is positive.